There's no one that I could talk to about this that doesn't actually sense the truth of it. Some form of inquiry really is key for awakening. Question the thoughts, but trust yourself. Trust your deepest instinct. You can't force awakening to just suddenly appear, and you know it. It's sublime. It's bigger than you. At the same time, you can't spit it out. You can't forget about it. You can't just go, oh, I'll pretend that's not happening. No, the first stage of awakening is really recognizing the nature of consciousness itself. You are not that doubt. Those thoughts do not define you. It doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is, are you willing to question your beliefs in a very specific way? When you really start asking the universe for truth, be open to what it's going to show you, because it will. When the shift actually happens, there's this really deep, almost like a primordial certainty that's obvious in the way people will speak. The barrier to experiencing reality as it actually is when I was 24 years old. I had a very, very profound, very fundamental shift in the way I experience reality, like literally everything. The sense of self, the sense of time and space, everything shifted very fundamentally and it didn't shift back. So the implications were vast, and it took me many, many years to even recognize what the implications were, although it was very clear what had happened by its very nature. Strangely, I didn't feel inclined to talk about it. And I can explain why, but I wasn't in a space where I felt like I needed to hide that truth, but I could see that it could be communicated easily. And I could actually see that a lot of people, I think, do miscommunicate it, but it just didn't feel, I suppose, like the right timing to talk about it. It honestly never really crossed my mind. So for 12 to 15 years or so, I never even brought it up. Like I didn't talk about it to anybody. And then interestingly and very organically, it would start to come up in conversations, but it didn't feel like I would randomly bring up spirituality. It actually just felt like a very natural, organic conversation. And something in the way the conversation was flowing, people would say, that thing you just said, can you write that down? Can you like write out what you just said and email it to me? Cause like after you said that, something happened. I went home and I started having this shift in my experience, and this would just happen very randomly. And that's kind of how it started. And then it snowballed from there. And I was writing an email to a group of people with kind of my perceptions on the experience. And it just really did snowball into ultimately writing a book.
Tell us a little bit about the state, and was it disconcerting at the time when you popped in, or was it, like you said, by its own nature, it was self-evident? Was it comforting? Was it disconcerting?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, for me, the shift was from a place of significant amounts of suffering. Up until I was 24, I would say suffering was the sort of main tone of my experience. Although I definitely didn't realize the degree to which I was suffering until it stopped happening. So the analogy I might give is, if you're carrying a backpack and then, every week someone drops a pebble in your backpack for year after year after year, you don't realize it, but you're carrying a very heavy weight. And that's how it felt to me. I knew I was suffering. I knew things were uncomfortable. I knew it had something to do with my thoughts, but I had no idea the degree. And when this dropped away, when this what I would call the identity structure as I knew it dropped away, it was a vast relief. It was the best thing that had ever happened to me. It was obvious that's what I wanted. It was obvious in some sense that's what everybody wants, although I think not everybody is fully on board with it yet, because it has such profound implications, and I think everybody senses that. So yeah, but for me, there was nothing disconcerting about it. It was like finally seeing reality as it actually is. Finally seeing identity as it actually is. And it changed everything. It was, like I said, the best thing that ever happened to me, hands down.
You use the word reality and identity interchangeably there. Can you describe the relationship?
Mm. Okay, so now we're getting into the deep stuff, right? The weeds. So what I found, to put it in simple terms, and this aligns with pretty much all the ancient wisdom teachings I've ever found, the mystical teachings and so forth, is that the barrier to experiencing reality unfiltered, the barrier to experiencing reality as it actually is not a big deal. It's not a big thing. It's actually something that's rather thin, but it has a profound effect when we are bought into it, when we bind ourselves to it, and we bind through thought, actually, and that is identity. The taking yourself to be something that's limited in dimension, that's subject to time and space, something that's discrete and thought based, something that's entangled with definitions, memory, time, and so forth. That apparatus is the sort of filter. It's that prevents us from experiencing reality as it is, timeless, not subject to even space. The experience of duality, that is actually our natural state. Very obviously, once the shift occurs and it goes deep enough, it's obvious to everyone. And I find, interestingly, that people, no matter what walk of life they're from, what their background is, whether they're Buddhist or Christian or atheist, and I know many people who are sort of scientific, maybe not atheists, but certainly not like devout religious people, who find exactly the same thing. It's that kind of thing where it's so clear and so obvious once the realization has matured, that you would probably use very similar, if not the same words to describe it. It's just very obvious. So again, reality unfiltered is available to all of us. And people know this, but we have ourselves convinced we have to do things to like cause it in a way. But you can't cause reality to be what it is. It already is what it is. So for instance, psychedelics comes into the conversation a lot now, right? More and more. Through the use of psychedelics, you can get these tastes of reality that is unfiltered. It's not subject to time and space. The sense of self can be completely obliterated for a period of time, but then it comes back, right? It comes back, and you remember yourself having an ego death. So I would call that on the spectrum of experience. What I'm talking about is on the spectrum of realization, where the identity itself, I would say, is altered such that you can experience that all the time. So you can literally experience what we might call mystical states ongoing.
There's so many questions in there. I think therefore I am is kind of being completely debunked in there. But one of the pieces is you said reality unfiltered, which then also does beg the question in terms of, well, what imposes itself as a filter on us, and I think the deeper question is that if there is an unfiltered reality waiting for us to come home to, what is the purpose of all this, or like the filtered nature of reality? Why the filter, and what does it serve?
Yeah, so a really good question, and it becomes pretty philosophical because there are a lot of things I can't give you an answer for. One is the why of it. The way it appears to me is kind of an accident. It appears that it's a sort of side effect of having a complex nervous system, and a complex, in a very specific way, complex enough mind to become self-aware. The self-awareness, the ability to stand back and reflect on the self and reflect on the world as an object, or as an array of objects, that is a filter that has far more implications than most people realize. And the only way you really know that is when the filter drops and the experience of a self apart from the world cannot be found anymore at all. And it's the people's reaction to it when they first taste it, when they may get like an experience of it that's brief, can be anywhere from ecstatic to like terrifying, literally, because the way that the sort of ego structure reacts when it comes back online is anyone's guess. It may really enjoy it if it was having a really difficult time before, or if it felt like it was having a pleasant time before, it might start to feel like it's grieving its own death or something. So we can have a lot of different kinds of reactions to that experience of dropping of the sense of a separate self, the sense of a self apart from the world. But one thing that's certain is when it happens, people almost universally recognize that is far more primary of an experience, far more of a true experience. Why? It's hard to explain why, but I would say it has two components to it that seem rather paradoxical, but in direct experience, they're not paradoxical at all. One is it has sort of a vastness to it, like an infinity and expansiveness. And this is often what's attributed to mystical states, this talk of infinity or expansiveness or the whole universe all experienced right here. But the other aspect is a little harder to talk about, but it's equally as sort of mystifying and rather enjoyable. And that is what I just call intimacy, where it feels like nothing is apart from you in a very obvious way. There's nothing outside. There's nothing that you need to get to. There's nothing that you need to accomplish to make yourself feel better. You can accomplish all you want, but you already feel okay, and that you're fundamentally okay, just how things are right now. So there's a fundamental okayness or an equanimity that is notably absent for most people, I would say, when they're sort of mind identified or identified with thought. So what is the filter and the mechanism of the filter? Essentially, it's thought. We all know we have a lot of thoughts. We know thoughts can be uncomfortable. We know that we can have obsessive thoughts or ruminating thoughts or anxiety-provoking thoughts. But I even with all of that, in my experience, until a shift occurs, it's hard to see how binding that actually is, that world of thought. So, so for me, what was so amazing when this shift occurred was the realization that before the shift, the thoughts seemed so real. The world of me and my problems and the solutions I need and seeking and pushing against life and struggling and defending, like all of that was so visceral. It felt so real, but it was all thought based. And it was so obvious after the shift. Oh, those were thoughts. They're like ghosts. They're not even, they're nothing. But the realness, which the thoughts were trying to get to, is already here. And it's so like luminous and radiant. It's so pristine, the aliveness of literally everything. So it was like this inversion where before it seemed like the thoughts were real and the sort of sense fields that are just available all the time were kind of at a distance and kind of a little bit opaque or something. And it flipped to where thoughts felt like ghosts, but they were kind of floaty consciousness. This experience of unbound consciousness was obvious. It was always there afterward for sure. And the sense fields are just the aliveness, which is not dualistic. It's experienced non-dualistically, not separated, no separation. We're just radiant and really beautiful and always there and kind of always amazing. Like, wow, you just kind of feel like how did this happen? How did I miss this? But also, how can it be this simple and this profound and this immediately available all the time? And yet it still is. That hasn't changed. So that's what happened with me. It was like an inversion between the importance of thoughts and then what I guess everything else seemed to be, which seemed off in the distance, even though it's not. And then the thoughts are suddenly just not interesting or important, although they can still be there. It doesn't matter. And this intimate, expansive, inward and outward experience of unity and interpenetration that's here all the time became far more prominent. So that's another way I could explain it.
Hey there, Inspired Soul. Just a quick little favor to ask for. Please take a moment to hit subscribe to the channel if you can. Everything you see around here at the Inspired Evolution is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. It makes all the difference that you can see. So please take a moment. I'll wait for you. There we go. Just hit subscribe. It's just down there. Thank you so much. Back to this conversation with Angelo. It's I'm sure some people listening in, it must be frustrating because at some point, yeah, and maybe you can reflect on your own journey for us, which is hearing you share about how, the thoughts are just, I don't want to say parked to one side, but sort of parked to one side, and then the experience of what is, comes to be. Most of us listening in will be like, okay, now I'm thinking about how to park my thoughts to one side, and it's just like, damn it, I'm doing it again. Your journey, like, was it somewhat thought directed towards the aspirations towards to come to a certain state? And did the thoughts serve till a certain point, at which point they had to lose there? Or like, what's the dance there?
Yeah. For most of those years, until, like I said, I was 24 years old, I knew something was uncomfortable. Something felt wrong. It felt like there has to be something more than this. There has to be a different way of experiencing than this. But I hadn't really seen it. I hadn't come across anything that showed me that it was really possible until, with a couple exceptions. And I write about these in my book. But until I heard it in the right way. when I heard it in the right way, all of a sudden it didn't feel like I was hearing about enlightenment, which is about a bunch of monks and a guy named Buddha 2,500 years ago speaking a language I didn't know in a culture I didn't understand with a bunch of concepts I didn't understand. That's how that always sounded to me. But for some reason, I heard it this time and it was like, no, no, no. It's talking about you right now. And this is my book. My book points right to you all the time. That's what I'm saying is this isn't about ancient doctrine. It's not even about whether you believe it or not. It doesn't matter what you believe. This isn't about what you believe. This is about you. It's about your true identity. And your true identity, of course, is always accessible. But we've learned to like leapfrog over it. We've learned to somehow see around it constantly through the lens of thought. So the first big shift, the first sort of stage of awakening that I would describe is really recognizing the nature of consciousness itself. Consciousness meaning the substance in which thoughts arise and fall. And most importantly, the substance in which you are perceiving yourself as a sort of separate entity from the thoughts and from the world. Realizing that the entirety of consciousness is the experience of I, is the experience of identity. Not intellectually realizing that, experientially realizing that, that is a shift, and it's a very obvious shift. That's what I would call first awakening. So once I tasted somehow the instinct or insight that that was possible, I knew exactly where I was going. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but it was so obvious that it was like, I don't even need a technique. Like there's going to be a way to do this. And I could just feel something inside me orienting toward it. Literally like someone just shifted the lens of my reality towards something that was rather mysterious, but I also knew it was more real than anything I had ever experienced. So I have to say it was a pretty instinctual thing. And the conceptual mind doesn't like to hear this, I know, but it's okay. It doesn't matter what your mind is saying. If you're listening to this and your mind is going, I don't know if he's talking about something in my experience, or maybe it happened to him, it can't happen to me, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, those are thoughts. Those are doubt thoughts, right? I was literally a walking wall of doubt. I didn't realize it, but everything about what I experienced was actually laden with doubt. And so I was moving from doubt all the time because I was moving from this experience of a thought-based self. What I'm pointing everyone to is the truth that you are not that doubt. Those thoughts do not define you. And there's a way to see beyond those thoughts. There's a way to move beyond those thoughts, beyond let me say the binding of those thoughts. You're not trying to get rid of thoughts. That's kind of a misnomer with meditation often. It's really just moving beyond the binding of thoughts. And it's definitely possible. And I see it happen again and again and again. It's happening more and more and more now that I'm making more videos and interacting with more people. Again, all walks of life, people as young as 18 or 19, people in their late 70s, actually 80s, every walk of life, no matter what your beliefs are, if you're super scientific, if you're super not scientific and very spiritual and have that kind of mind, it doesn't matter, actually. It doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is, are you willing to question your beliefs in a very specific way in regards to your own identity? If you're willing to do that, I have really good news for you.
I think it's only appropriate we ask how to question our beliefs.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it, but let me just back up just a little bit and say, again, anyone who doesn't know my stuff may be asking like, okay, what are you really telling me I can do though, Angelo? What are you saying? What kind of practices, techniques, what are you advocating? So first of all, I do advocate that instinct, like really find this in your instinct and do some sort of soul searching. Like, am I really suffering more than I realize? Is there something more real available instinctually, right? And so that's a really important part of it. But as far as down and dirty techniques or what do you do? Generally speaking, some form of inquiry, and we can talk about what I mean by inquiry. It is the conventional idea of a question and asking a question and looking for an answer. It's that, at least it starts with that, but it has to kind of be framed the right way, and you have to sort of approach it the right way to be the type of inquiry I'm talking about. But I find some form of inquiry really is key for awakening. And to make a contrast, I have nothing against meditation or mindfulness practices. I love to meditate. I've meditated for many, many years. I meditated for 5 years before this awakening, but it didn't cross me over. It definitely didn't. And I don't know if it ever would have. It maybe, who knows? But many people meditate for decades and they don't actually have this shift. Doesn't mean they can't. It just means that meditation isn't necessarily the vehicle. Same with mindfulness practices. Mindfulness practices, very powerful, have a lot of benefits. If you really take them to the extreme, the empirical extreme, they may start to turn into inquiry. Like if you really are precise and ruthless about what you're actually experiencing, but that's going to start to turn into inquiry. So inquiry is as simple as, I've always taken myself to be someone, right? I know who I am. If I were to ask you, who are you? Oh, well, I'm Angelo and I'm this age and I came from this city and I have this profession and I have this history and these kinds of relationships, right? And I'd say, okay, well, those are a bunch of memories occurring right now, right? Anyone can play along with this. So if I say, who are you? And your mind starts creating thoughts that say, well, I'm this and I'm that, but it's all based on memories. I'd say, no. That's not what I'm asking you. I understand those memories are there. I'm asking you what you are right now. What are you right now? And you'd say, oh, well, I'm a body, right? And I'd say, okay, that's maybe a little closer because we could almost say there seems to be a body right here, right? But then I might say, have you ever been around a newborn baby? Have you ever looked into a newborn baby's eyes? Have you ever considered when the newborn baby's looking out at the world, do you think it sees a person? Do you think it thinks it has a body? No. But there's something there and it's really obvious. And I would just argue there's something there in you right now that's that primary. So before the thought comes that says, oh, I'm a body, right? Before that thought comes, what are you? Really, what are you? So that's one form of inquiry is, but the key is you have to be somewhat curious yourself. Another approach to inquiry could be, okay, all of these thoughts tell me who I think I am, right? I can have thoughts that say, I'm a good person, but underneath, if I really dig, I'm like, yeah, but there's a thought that really wonders if I am. Maybe I'm not a good person. So there's a fear thought. So am I that thought? Wait, which thought am I, right? And then, you can kind of look at that and go, all right, so no matter where I direct my attention into, let's call it the thought space, which is another really interesting question. Where the heck is that? Where do these thoughts appear, right? So the thoughts are there and there's something that seems to be there engaging those thoughts. There's something that seems to either reject a thought or believe a thought or even create a thought. Well, what is that though? What is that? Can you turn around and look at it? And if not, why not? Can you move your attention through consciousness, noticing the thoughts? And if I'd said to you, okay, well, let's say you identify with one thought that appears, but before that thought appeared, did you not exist? That thought is not defining your existence. So what are you, right? So I can be really direct and sort of ruthless in that way, or I can just say, hey, find the question for you. That's the most important question in your life, really. And give yourself permission to ask it, no matter whether you've heard anyone ask it, whether your instincts would tell you it would scare other people to hear. Doesn't matter. What matters is it real for you? And it could be, what is suffering, right? Because for me, it was like, what is suffering? Or the Buddhist term would be unsatisfactoriness, right? What the hell is that? Why do we suffer? Why do we, and that can be a really good question to ask if you're willing to look into the mechanism itself, which will lead you back to identity. So inquiry, and I have many ways of doing this that we could talk about, but inquiry oriented toward the fundamental experience of what you take yourself to be, or identity, or why you feel separate, why you feel separate from life, why you feel hesitant maybe from life. What is actually going on? Like that kind of inquiry, in my experience, is really what lights this up, what leads you to a transformation.
Hey there guys, Amrit here again. Just quickly wanted to ask you a question for the comments below. Leave me a comment, that's me writing back to you. I'd love to understand what your relationship and awareness and understanding of identity is. Identity and belief systems and structures. We're really diving deep into it here with Angelo today, and it's really interesting talking to someone that's in the non-dual state about identity, as I'm sure you can appreciate. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. What's your awareness of identity and any work that you've done in this space? Back to today's episode. And it's mostly harboring that inquiry and allowing it to manifest in many different forms, whether it's through, your yogic practice, your meditation practice, your mindfulness practice, but like you said, not necessarily like, you sitting at the lights waiting for red to go green, but just sort of having that as a contemplative practice in the back of your head is what I'm hearing is a necessary ingredient.
It's interesting how this is applied on an individual basis varies tremendously. Some people will just naturally apply it during meditation because they meditate a lot and that feels like the central focus of their spiritual world. That's fine. It's actually a great time to do it. But many people wake up in very mundane situations too, at work, driving, in all kinds of situations. It can happen very randomly. So when do you approach it? When do you do these types of inquiries? Whenever it feels most relevant and natural to you, honestly. it may take you a little while to really find the right question and the right way to ask it. But stay open. Stay open. You might get clues when you really start asking the universe for truth. Be open to what it's going to show you, because it will. So it can happen in all different settings. You can apply this wherever it feels most natural to you to apply, and how you want to apply it, actually. So a very important part of this, which goes back to the very first part I said, which is there has to be some instinct, some about this. That's really important. But a very important part of this is we are very wired to look outside of ourselves for permission for certain things, especially really important things. We tend to look for permission, almost like I have to look out there in the world and find someone who's done this or who can tell me how to do it. But this is such a personal process that approach doesn't really work with this. You have to give yourself permission to go the way you need to go and to go where you need to go. And for some people, they're so intuitive that I just say, and this is literally true. I've had this happen with a good number of people where I just say, there's a place you've always wanted to go. And I know it because if I'm talking to someone, I can pick it up sometimes. And I'll say, it's safe to go there. It's okay to go there. Just give yourself permission to go there. I know no one else has given you permission to, but I'm telling you, that's where you want to go. That's where you can go, and you can trust it. And that has led people to awakening more than a handful of times. Not everybody is wired that way. Some people have to practice for a while to give themselves permission to let go to that degree. But everybody has something in them that knows this orientation. It might take a while to cultivate until that's really obvious, or you may hear something like this talk and go, okay, I know what that is. I know what he's talking about, right? Because that's what happened to me. I heard someone talking about it, and I even asked him. It was a lecture actually in a class in college, and it was a guest professor who was a monk, a Buddhist monk, and the way he was talking about Buddhism sounded familiar, and all of a sudden it was different. I'm like, wait a minute. And I raised my hand and I said, this thing you're talking about, is this possible? Like in this lifetime for me? And he just was very, very unequivocally, supportive. And he just walked forward and he looked right in my eyes and he said, there is no doubt. And then he backed up, he paused and he backed up and went on lecturing. And I was like, whoa, he totally just transmitted something to me. He told me something. He recognized that I picked it up and he confirmed it for me. And I said, oh shit. Okay, now I know I can go there. I know it's a possibility. And yeah, it took me, I don't know how long it took me after that. It was a little while. It didn't happen right away, but it planted a seed for sure. And then that signature of truth, that signature of living truth, that's very intimate. Again, it's right here, has to be right there for you, for whoever's listening. You will orient to that at some level. And at some point it'll just open more and more and more, and you'll start to see it everywhere. And when you get close to awakening, often, not always, but often when you get sort of close to it, I don't know, a week out or something, I notice this with people, they start to see it everywhere, actually. They're like, oh man, I used to think this inquiry was only when I was, meditating in deep meditation, or right as I was going off to sleep, or when I'm listening to music or in nature, some specific time. And all of a sudden I realized, no, wait a minute, it's here all the time. Like it's right in front of my face. No matter where I look, I can't not see it. It's not yet an awakening, but that's when it's really starting to pick up traction. There's a really cool description in a Zen koan called Joshu's Mu, and it says, "You'll feel like you've swallowed a red hot iron ball you can neither spit out nor swallow." And that's how it is. I mean, it's intense because it's a Zen, Japanese Zen sort of saying, but it is rather like that. It's you can't swallow it, meaning you can't control it, but you can't force awakening to just suddenly appear, and it's sublime. It's bigger than you. At the same time, you can't spit it out. You can't forget about it. You can't just go, oh, I'll pretend that's not happening. No, it's just so much bigger than you. And it's a really good place to be. And I usually can pick up when people are right there, like just talking to them. It's kind of obvious. It's almost like they're talking from two different worlds, from the personal world of thought and then from this other world, and they don't quite realize it yet. And it's like I can feel both of those energies simultaneously, and all of a sudden one comes forward, and that's it.
The question for each individual seems to be tailored to the individual, as you previously described. Does the question originally stem for most people from their deepest core wounding, or not necessarily?
It can be, but I really don't want to put any stringent limitations on this, because it really is just a little different for everyone. I might even say some people don't even have a question per se. like I said, some people are so intuitive, they just know where to go. They know, like, this outward looking through thought is something I learned. My parents taught me how I should be and how I should think about myself and what my religion is. And I learned how to be a good adult, and I practice that all the time. So I'm like always doing these things that seem like outward focus. And I just say, that's fine. Keep doing it. And if you want to turn inward, look inward too, see what's there. And some people just totally get that. They're like, whoa, okay, all right, I'll go there. And then they'll usually feel fear, like excitement and fear simultaneously, that kind of thing. And yet their instinct knows where to go. So for some people, there may not even be a question, but it is rather personal. It's a little different for everyone. I really try to cultivate this sort of trust in yourself, but trust in yourself beyond thought, right? Question the thoughts, but trust yourself, trust your deepest instinct. And yeah, it looks a little different for everyone.
And so the end of suffering is a pretty profound theme through your work. Can you expand upon what that, I don't even know, feels like, is like for those swimming through it?
Yeah. There's a lot of profundity that I could describe in the sort of physical experience of it. But even the physical experience, like the equanimity that felt in the body, actually, and the body is felt. It's like, can sound very psychedelic, but it's kind of experiences like body, world, universe. It's like all one interpenetrated experience. The sound and the sensations in the body and the sense of barriers and boundaries is gone, and so it's all like an interpenetrating, intimate experience. So, but even that is not really the key to what it means to end suffering. What it means to end suffering is for delusion to end. Delusion here very specifically meaning any idea that things could be any different than they are, should be any different than they are, or that there's anything standing apart from a world out there that needs to act upon it to change it. So what often happens is someone hears that and they go, oh, that could be bad because I can't respond to the environment. If something's wrong, I can't fix it and so forth. That's actually not what I mean. It's not like that. You actually respond much more seamlessly to the environment when you are the environment. It's that easy. Like there's not an experience of a self apart from an environment anymore. So it's like environment acting. I might say just body, mind, world. It's just one seamless movement all the time. So from that, the natural conclusion, which can take a little while because there can still be some strong tendency to try to stand apart, even though you can't, which is a little hard to explain, but you feel it when it's happening. But the natural conclusion will be, oh, there never was anything apart. There was never anything acting upon reality as a subject. Reality is not an object, so there's nothing that needs to push or pull against life at all. So there's a deep equanimity that comes with that. But again, there's a responsiveness and creativity that's just natural, intrinsic to the experience. It's not your creativity. It's just like pure creativity. It's not your environment. It's just an environment. And it works better than, for me, far better than it did when there was a thought in the way all the time. And there was a sense of trying to defend yourself and what am I going to get out of this? Or what am I going to miss? Or, all the FOMO and all this stuff is just gone. And it's so peaceful that way, right? Sometimes I say this is the opposite of FOMO, if you can imagine what that would be. Fear of missing out. Like you almost feel bad that people are missing out on their own direct experience. Not mine, theirs.
Yeah, I'm trying to put the reverse in my head. It's like the love of being in, the fear of missing out, or the love of being in.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah. It feels like that. In. It's like everything is kind of yes instead of no. Yeah.
I think I might have asked this question in a similar vein, but not exactly this way. But maybe not quite. Yeah. Because what we're discussing is seeking versus being to some degree, and I think so many of us might, are oftentimes seeking, and there seems to be a particular shift in one's awareness that brings them into being at a certain point. Would you say that's at the heart of what your work is trying to espouse? And how do we go about surrendering the seeking, I guess, when it's so it's kind of that old what got you here won't get you there sort of thing, but it's gotten us here.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of this is really about addressing that seeking mechanism. Um, Although usually I don't necessarily recommend somebody address it directly, but it's the seeking is a byproduct. The seeking is a byproduct of the sense of separation. So if you feel like you're apart from a world, you're apart from other people, you're apart from events and times and spaces, which actually ends up being you're apart from a heck of a lot, kind of like everything. That's an uncomfortable place to be. When that's not there, then seeking doesn't really make sense anymore. There's like nothing to seek. It's like it's already here. So again, it's like that in. It just goes inward, inward, outward, inward. But it's all seamless and without bounds. It's boundless clarity is as a one description I would give it. And then the experience of being is obvious. It's everything. It already is everything, and there's no one apart from it. So the experience of being becomes rather primary instead of the sense of seeking. And from there, actually, the realization can deepen and refine until you even deconstruct what being actually is. You can sort of deconstruct even what consciousness actually is, but it gets very subtle. It's hard to talk in really precise terms about this because there's not really language for it. But it does deepen, this is another thing that really surprises people. You can be in deep realization and feel like there's nothing that could fall away anymore. There's no boundaries. There's no sense of body apart from a universe. I don't feel like there's any suffering. There doesn't feel like there's struggle. It feels like equanimity. And then another layer of clarity comes, and people are just like, "What? How is this even possible?" And I hear this like happened with a friend just I think yesterday. They were messaging me about it, and it's a fascinating thing. It kind of just keeps going actually in one sense because infinity is a whole lot, right? I mean, there's no limitation. So it does have there's something about it that feels like it's always falling away, dissolving, reappearing, reconstituting. But again, it's not happening outside. It's not, there's inside and outside aren't really there.
That alludes that awakening is a gradual process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I would say the initial shift is often really distinct. Sometimes people will say like, I couldn't tell where it happened, but it was within a couple days somewhere in there. Other people will say, oh, I remember the exact moment it happened, like the exact moment. So it tends to be a pretty abrupt and obvious shift, that first awakening that I talk about, that initial shift. From there, it kind of unfolds in layers, I would say. And very commonly, you'll have that shift. And then there'll be this like honeymoon period where you feel rather enlightened. Like everything just feels completely wide open, blissful, peaceful equanimity. The equanimity is just obvious. It's everything. And then I don't know, a few months later, you start to experience the conditioning that was already there, but you experience it in a very direct way now, actually. So in one sense, it's a little more uncomfortable than it was before, but you also don't lose the clarity that came. So it's a strange place, but we go through this basically what I call like deep shadow work. So you can do shadow work before awakening for sure, but after awakening, you will do it. There's no choice, and you don't miss anything. Like this goes back for everything. So you'll be all the way down in the emotion body and into like the most primal fears, and you'll experience all of that very very clearly, like with crystal clarity, with like a magnifying glass. It's not always fun for sure, but there is a finite amount of that, and I don't know, that lasts usually a couple years or so. And it's not constant, but it does come and go a lot. And then beyond that, you start to become really curious about these very fundamental filters, like I mentioned, time and space. The sense of there being time, temporality, continuity, perpetuity. It feels very obvious in thought. Like when you're kind of identified in thought, it's hard to even question that because it just seems so real. But it will actually start to dissolve, and you can use really precise types of inquiries to dissolve it. Same with the experience of separation, subject object experience, and space. And there's ways to like really work and deconstruct those subtle filters, but it's very very difficult to do that when there's a lot of reactivity, resistance, and like repressed emotion, which essentially everybody has. This is what I found. Even very emotionally healthy people, they'll find some really deep existential fears and things floating around that are just not available without a significant shift in identity. So that first shift really opens this big space for you to kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb, and you don't have to know how to do it. It will come to you, and really feel into everything that was sort of missed or repressed, see any belief that is binding, and continue to release those beliefs. And that process, like I said, can take some time, a year or two, maybe more. And it's not constant. It fluctuates, it waxes and wanes, but it is definitely part of the process. So I've never ever seen anybody have a first awakening and then it's just over. Like no suffering, no sense of self apart, no sense of time, space, duality, and flow, equanimity. All illusion is dispelled like right away. I've never seen that. I don't think it happens. You really do go through some phases after that first shift.
And the first phase, not necessarily, like you said, there's a lot of shadow work baked into there. Seems, and maybe this is just the perspective from this particular place, but shadow work usually involves a lot of emotional work, but also mental labeling of the emotional work to be able to understand and process it. But at that particular juncture, when you're saying you're sort of popping into an awakening in the thought forms, just thought forms. What does the work actually look like in that space? Is it like, is the space being held with some love, or is it just, are you just unraveling rather rapidly?
Both, actually. So it looks a lot of different ways, and everybody has a little bit of a different journey with this. But a good portion of it is realizing how much emotion is repressed automatically by thought. We don't realize how much that happens. And when I say repressed emotion, there's no one guilty of repressing it.
Can you say that again?
Okay.
I think that's really important.
Until that first shift, it's very difficult to realize. I'm not sure it's possible to realize that the extent to which emotion is repressed by thought. We don't realize that until all of a sudden the thoughts aren't binding anymore. And now it's like this stuff that's down here just starts popping up to the surface. You're like, where'd you come from? Where'd you come from? So a lot of it is really, it's acceptance, love, feeling, literally feel, very direct feeling. And just realizing that all the little thoughts that come when you're feeling that, and especially again, like existential fear, shame, the more what people might call negative emotions, which I don't necessarily, they're just emotions. But when those come, the thoughts are much more acute often, like really shameful thoughts or fearful thoughts, or, those kinds of, and seeing like, oh, it's not about the thoughts. It's really just an experience. You start to realize you have a tremendous bandwidth for experience beyond what you ever thought you had. And you're sort of learning that as you work through this. You're learning that, wow, okay, yeah. So the bandwidth for experience here is profound, and it goes very deep. And you don't even need to handle anything. It's not about handling. It's really just a matter of realizing your nature of, again, being is vast, and that the thoughts are distorting in nature. So it's simultaneously an experience of directly sitting with the emotion with compassion, curiosity, love, and just a sort of acceptance that this is a natural and lawful part of the process. And some inquiry can be really helpful to like unhook from those emotions. Unhook from those thoughts about the emotions that are, could say like, oh, if you keep feeling this, you're going to go crazy, or whatever, like these bizarre thoughts that will come in trying to just distract you or grab your attention or something. And so inquiry is helpful here as well, to realize like those thoughts don't really help. In fact, they just kind of intensify the process totally unnecessarily. So that will come into play. Also, somatic modalities will come into play. Physical modalities. You'll notice like tremendous amounts of energy moving through the body, like beyond what you thought was possible. This is one of the funny things I make a joke about sometimes, is like, if you're a really scientific minded person and you hear people talking about energy in spiritual context, you might be like, oh, that's woo woo, until you start having involuntary body movements and meditation and they don't stop. And you're laying there all night and it feels like you're, 120 volt circuit plugged into 1,000 watts, just like 1,000 volts, just constantly surging through. It doesn't happen to everyone, but some people get very intense energetics. And it's kind of like, it's just because those channels are just open suddenly and you don't realize how much energetic contraction there was in the body. And so they start, those channels open, and the energy you feel it moving through, and, up the spine, down the spine, you might even get twitches, involuntary body movements and things like that. Again, most people don't have extreme versions of that, but you feel it. You feel stuff going on in the body, and somatic modalities can be really helpful, like TRE, trauma releasing exercise, yoga. This is where things like qigong can be really, really helpful if you have a good teacher, because those actually are about managing energies, and so things like that can be helpful. For me, a lot of it was intuitive. I just knew the way my body needed to move. And I'm not a super kinesthetic or athletic guy, but I just knew it. Like I would go lay on the floor and, just move the muscles that we needed to move and twist around a little bit and shake. And like, I just, when this much energy was moving through me, I knew I had to, like, I don't know, handle it or manage it or navigate it or let the body just sort of process it in a way I hadn't before. And, that happened for a couple of years for me, probably like at night more. And you just get used to having far more energy moving through. Like you may not need to sleep as much as you used to and things like that. And that can be disconcerting at first until you realize, like, you don't really need to. You just thought you needed to sleep as much as you thought you needed to. And now you're sleeping a couple hours less every night and you're actually fine. So there are definitely energetic adjustments, no doubt about it. So some somatic or energetic modalities can be helpful with that. And then sometimes just the more traditional or conventional things like therapy. If you have a lot of trauma, you really will have to address it with this process, because one of the things that identity structure does that's based in thought is it mitigates trauma. It keeps it at bay. It keeps it out of your consciousness so you can function. So just know, if you have a lot of trauma and you haven't done a lot of work on it yet, you probably want to do it simultaneously with going through this process. But either way, you're going to have to. So there are more and more therapists now who are like awake, basically, who've gone through awakening themselves. And I'm kind of planning actually making a database for that, because I get that request a lot. But you may need some therapy that can be helpful, other relational work like circling. So a lot of different things come into play with this shadow work that we're talking about.
Random question. How much of your medical background was supportive to your awakening, or in the way of your awakening, would you say? Yeah.
Oh, well, the funny thing is that this happened before I was in medical training. So yeah, I mean,
Perfect. Sorry, that answers the question perfectly.
Not in contradiction at all. I'm a very scientific minded person. Like if you were to make a spectrum between like spiritual thinking and scientific thinking, I'm pretty empirical and scientific and like logical. So for me, it was fine going into medical training after this. The hard part was using the mind so constantly, like memorizing so massive amounts of information, when it was so much easier to just sit and meditate, or like just in being, where I didn't have to use the mind at all. It's so peaceful that it was almost like I almost wished I was suffering a little bit so I could go through it and convince myself I was going to get something out of it later, like that delayed gratification mental process or something. But I did fine in med school. I did pretty well. So it worked fine. But it was more like the really pushing yourself in the way you have to in medical school. That was kind of challenging, but it's fine. It's challenging for everyone anyway.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing. And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach outflow.com/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. In the book, there's this conversation around, how do I describe it? Pre-awakening experiences versus true awakenings. I think we have these little, I don't want to call them false starts, but spurts before the fountain flows sort of thing. Can you describe that? Because I think it's important to be able to have that distillation, the awareness.
Yeah, for sure. It's an important distinction. I mentioned it before in our conversation. The distinction I will make to simplify it is the distinction between an experience and realization or awakening. An experience is such that no matter how profound, transformative, or I guess altered the state or the experience is, you, as you take yourself to be coming out the other side of it, is essentially unchanged. The identity structure itself is unchanged. You'll have a very different view of reality, maybe. You may have a different view of life, but the identity structure itself is fundamentally the same on the other side. And that can happen with very, very extreme experiences, including psychedelic experiences, ego death experiences, and so forth. So an experience happens to someone, and that one that it happens to is not fundamentally changed, really. Again, they may learn from it for sure. They may have a much more open experience of life after that, but the sense of identity is essentially the same. With an awakening, it can be anywhere from having like really mind-blowing mystical experiences ongoing through the awakening to being rather simple, actually, and very, I don't know, not a big deal. Like experientially, it's not a big deal, but fundamentally, the sense of identity is definitely altered, and that's the difference. And I've interviewed many people on my channel. I have a playlist of like awakening interviews, and if you watch them, you'll see like, yeah, it's very different for people. But the one thing that's very obvious is they know something has fundamentally been changed about themselves, and what it is obvious to me. And when I ask them about it, it's obvious to them as well. So that's really the key distinction. Is what we're talking about with this is identity. And that may come with some pretty wild and crazy, mind-blowing mystical experiences, even beyond anything you had experienced before, or it may not. But you will damn well know something about what you took yourself to be before was totally illusory. And what you wake up to, what you realize now, is literally not the same thing. It's almost like I don't want to say a new identity, because it's not quite like that. It's like a very small, easily threatenable, structured, rigid, requiring a lot of energy to maintain identity is suddenly blown out into something that feels like an infinite identity. That's literally what it is. So the interpretations of that vary, but that's the key. And it's usually not subtle. It's usually pretty obvious.
I'm thinking about a dear friend here. And you mentioned the interpretations can vary. So one of the interesting things is he's consistently looking, like he's deeply steeped into personal development, and he's consistently looking to upgrade his identity, is the way that he puts it. It's like, I'm only limited because I haven't upgraded my identity. So I'm trying to basically get the identity upgrade that then, makes me feel less limited, is probably I'm putting words in his mouth now, but that's kind of the connotations I receive. In this particular conversation, that kind of feels like that's like identity in that realm is sort of over here, and then there's just a ladder in there, and the game's been trying to play it, whereas there's all this other space over here. Can you explain and articulate that for him?
Sure. Well, the way you just said it sounds rather right to me. I can't really speak to something someone else said if I didn't hear him say it. And even if I did hear him say it, I often have to clarify. So I can't be sure what he's actually talking about. But yeah, that often even hearing this stuff for a while until it really clicks, it can still feel like that, like, oh, another way to think about myself. Yeah, like this awakening, I'm going to think of myself as an awakening person now. And that happens sometimes with this, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's actually what's happening back. It's behind the scenes that this happens. So you can't actually force an upgrade of identity in the way I'm talking about. What you can do though, and he's probably in really good territory, what you can do is investigate the nature of identity, the limiting nature of identity itself. But I would say the key there is to investigate it. If someone who said that to me asked me how to approach awakening with that view, I would say something like this. I would say, you're in a good territory in that you're questioning identity. But what I would caution you about is, don't have preconceived ideas about what you think it's going to be like after. Because then what you're going to do is you're going to construct an idea of your own identity like a role-playing game or something. Like, that's how we think about ourselves. It's crazy. But it's much more simple than that. It's much more obvious than that. But it's also much more kind of mind-blowing than that, because it's just not about controlling and changing the way you are. That's the weird thing that we do with ourselves, is like, oh, I can make myself a better person and all this. And maybe you can in the relative, you can sort of cultivate better habits and all that. And that's great. I don't discount relative work that we do on ourselves. But this is just a whole other order of investigation I'm talking about. It's really beyond you. It's beyond you as you take yourself to be, by definition. So investigate identity, but just keep an open mind about where that'll actually lead you. Let it take you straight down the rabbit hole. Let it take you through this fundamental fear you might come into contact with, and keep going, and do not conclude anything about it. And it'll take you there. So everyone has their own way in, like I said. But it's like, but are you really willing to go completely into the unknown? That's what it comes down to. Are you really willing to go right into the mystery? And at some point you will be.
Deep into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, straight down.
Angelo, are your sense check on finger on the pulse kind of question, do you feel like more and more people are waking up at this particular time, more so than ever before? Or is it just people like yourself and myself producing content in a particular type of echo chamber?
I used to think, well, for one thing, it's not an echo chamber in the sense that people aren't, the people I'm talking about who are waking up, which there are many of them, they're not just mirroring back concepts to me, because I can interact with them and I can see they actually did wake up. So there's very real transformations happening. But the question I think that's more poignant there that you're asking is, like, is this a biased sample? Is it because I make videos about on awakening on YouTube and people search for awakening, and so I have a biased sample? Certainly that's part of it, right? If I were to talk to 1,000, my channel talks to 12,000 people a day. If I were to get a stadium of 12,000 people and start talking about awakening, maybe 1% are going to be interested. I don't know, 10%, 5%. I don't know what it is. Most of them are going to walk out because they're just not ready to hear that, and it's very direct. But on my channel, they're all interested in it. But so that is definitely a biased sample. So I can't overlook the fact that it's a biased sample. What I will say is, I feel like the more I've fleshed out my playlists and made it sort of the stages into playlists people can find and know where they are with things and what they want to work on, whether it's they're doing shadow work, emotion work, whether they're looking at thoughts, whether they're interested in mind identification and the mechanism of delusion. And the more I've sort of fleshed that out and have more resources out there, the faster people seem to wake up. It seems like that to me. Also, the more people that are waking up that start their own channel, they have different expressions than me. They talk in a slightly different way about it, or they just have a different personality and they reach more people. When even considering the biased sample, I really do think, looking at the last few years, more and more people are waking up to deeper stages of realization. And that's really critical, because you can have an initial awakening and go the rest of your life. If you didn't hear anybody talking about or pointing with clarity to deeper realization, you could easily overlook it because it gets very subtle. And you feel a heck of a lot better. Even that first shift, it's like you went from, for me, it was like suffering 92% of the time or something that I was awake to like almost none. So that was huge. But everybody's again different, and how the subsequent shifts come and when they come and so forth vary a lot. But I do think precise pointing and precise inquiries at deeper stages of realization are really helpful. And the more that I put those out there, and I've seen others put them out there, the faster it seems to be happening, and the more people it seems to be happening to. So I really do think that there's a snowball effect to this.
And you mentioned that it was a lecturer that came and yeah, sort of sparked something initially for yourself. And I imagine part of that drives why content means so much to you, just the availability of it. Do you think that's a great place for people to continue to steep their awareness if they are still
Yeah.
seeking? I'm conscious of where
Yeah,
the question's coming from.
that's what I'm always trying to do. Yeah, that's what I'm always trying to do is like, no matter what I'm talking about, I'm really always trying to give that direct taste again and again. And I've done it 50 times in this conversation. I do it in every video. I did all through my book. And I try to do it in all these different ways. I do it through the route of thoughts because I know we're identified with thoughts until we're not. I try to do it through the route of intuition, emotion, logic, whatever you need, like find your way in because you can. So I really do always try to give that taste. I'm always, and I know it works because people tell me all the time. They're like, oh man, I just heard that differently. I've heard you say that 100 times and this time it clicked big time and something feels different now, so that's what I'm doing all the time is really, it's like Eckhart Tolle has a nice analogy. He says, it's like if you have a log that's burning and there's a log over here that's not burning, put the non-burning log next to the burning log and it'll start burning. If you take it away too soon, it'll go out. But if you put it back, it'll start burning again. And at some point it can burn on its own without the first log. That's how this is. It really is. Like, I don't have anything special. Oh, this is really important. Okay. Man, there's so much psychology that goes into this. And I don't mean psychology to wake up. I mean psychology that makes it seem harder than it really is and makes it seem more obscure than it really is and elitist. And a lot of it's just tradition. Like we have, guru worship and things, people abusing positions of power and just confusing people. Here's the deal. Angelo is not more enlightened than anyone out there because there's the sense of Angelo is just kind of merged into everything anyway. It's like, it's not about me. I'm just talking about reality as I experience it. But the key message here is it's about you. Like, you can do this. And it's just really up to like how much are you willing to orient toward it and really give your heart to it and give, and be willing to inquire vulnerably and willing to feel everything that you're going to feel and willing to question your beliefs that aren't serving you. Like, if you're willing to do all of that, then this will go very, very deep for you. And that's the message I'm always trying to put out. Like, don't look at me as the guy who may have something you don't. It's not like that at all. You have something I don't if you're mind identified. That's all it is. There's a filter there. And I'm showing you like how to see the filter, how to stand apart from the filter and realize what it is, how to dissolve the filter, and more importantly, and most importantly, how to orient to the instinct that has nothing to do with that filter at all. Like, the filter is a distraction. Like, this is here for you, So really that's the fundamental message is like, A, it's possible. And here's a taste. If I can give it to you, if you listen long enough, you'll probably get that taste. And then once you get the taste, B, go there. You can go there in yourself. And that's the key. And there's techniques and practices, but the taste is important and the willingness to orient to it and realize like, this is the most important thing for me, or damn near the most important, it's up there for sure. That's where I see people that are going to start to wake up is like, they're not negotiating with it anymore. They're not trying to manipulate life. They're just going, okay, all right, I'm ready. Like, let's see where this takes me. Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing is that the intention is probably one of the most critical parts of being, I was on the journey and the process, but the title of the book is just present. The journey back to nowhere. You're already here. Sorry, is the irony of that. But the question that emerged is how do you go about it? You've mentioned inquiry. You've mentioned the intention. Is there a bit of a formula? How do we go about it? I imagine it's different for each individual.
It is. And, and in my book, I have many, many different approaches and techniques and ways to unpack inquiry and the framework for inquiry, how to formulate a question, what happens after you ask the question. So the mechanics I talk about frequently in the book and in videos and so forth. I can tie this back into a question you asked earlier that I don't know if I fully answered, but about seeking. Maybe I answered it in one way, but you talked about seeking. You don't necessarily have to try to stop seeking. Just see what it is. See that it's a mental process, right? And again, this is so variable. For some people, it's instinctual. They just turn toward that instinct. But for other people, they have so much seeking energy, so much doer energy. They need to do something with it. And that's fine. Let's do something with it. All right. If you want to take all that seeking, let's just narrow it down into like a fine point and use that like a drill to drill into the question, who am I? Or if you want to put it in Zen terminology, there's the most common first koan people are given in Zen by far is called, what is mu? M-U. There's an ancient story about it, but it's nothing about the story. It's about mu, right? And so the Zen teacher will give you this koan and say, go sit and meditate and bring me mu. Show me what mu is. So they'll go back, sit, meditate, come into the Dokusan room, talk to the Zen master and say, oh, I think mu is the universe and all the stars. And, and they'll say, no, that's conceptual. Bring me mu, right? And over time, you kind of become a little obsessed with it. Like, what is it? Because it's something. There's a truth to the question. There's a truth to the koan, and you see people waking up. It's working, but you can't for the life of you solve it with your mind, right? So this is beautiful. This is a way to focus all that energy and attention and intention into a fine point, but not giving it anything to think about. Like literally not giving it anything the mind can chew on. So at first it can be really cumbersome and strange. Like, well, where do I direct all the energy if it's not into thought? But at some point you'll realize, oh, I can direct it beyond thought. I can actually direct that energy and attention to a place that's not a thought. Well, what is that? Well, if I define it, it's a thought. So it doesn't matter what that is, but I can do it. So you can actually use all of that seeking energy and that drive and whatever it is that's being directed into thought. You can actually harness it into this, what we call a one-pointed approach. And this works for people frequently, and it just becomes such a singular focus. Your energy is focused directly on the question, ultimately one form or another of, what is my true nature? What is my true nature actually? And when you put that kind of energy and harness the energy that seems to move outward from you and turn it back around and like direct it right at its source, magic happens. I can't tell you why magic happens, but it's kind of like the Ouroboros, like it does. So that's one technique, is what we call a one-pointed approach. And I mean, I can give refinements to it and so forth as someone works through it. But again, you got to feel into what makes the most sense for you and kind of orient that way. Yeah, I have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Awakening Approaches. And that's the whole playlist is just different ways to like start moving toward awakening or start to, engage the process in earnest.
Amazing. I'll put a link to that in the description in the show notes of the podcast. The hallmarks of awakening, because you said even parts of it is like a gradual process, and greater and greater layers of clarity actually unfold. But you also mentioned that sometimes you can even tell when someone's it's about to happen for them, it's happened for them. So yeah, just to inspire us along a little bit, what are some of the hallmarks that you see for people?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really fun time when somebody's right up against it, like literally at the teetering on that precipice. It's like the most fun I could ever have, because I'm there with them. Like, again, I don't experience this sense of a me. I use the term me and I all the time. Those are conventional terms. That's not an experience here. The experience is, you're my experience. You're my reality, because I can't see this. I see that, right? So when somebody's right at that precipice, man, I'm there with them. It's so much fun. And sometimes it's a matter of just saying, just step. You know where to go. Just step. Just let go. Other times it's like, kind of seeing where they're negotiating still or something. But yeah, it's fun and it's obvious. Usually, how can I say what it feels like to me? What gives it away often is what felt like a lot of personal will that is dualistic experientially, like feeling like they're pushing against life. And all of a sudden it's like, that's not really there so much anymore. But it's replaced by this kind of deep reverence for the process itself, or just a deep reverence for truth, living truth, a deep reverence for reality itself. And just talking to them, I can feel it. And they're kind of like, they're almost like a newborn baby in a way, because they're like really all of a sudden in uncharted territory, but they haven't quite shifted yet. And they're like, I can just step off this. I'm like, yeah, go ahead and step off, see what happens. I can't, like, I can walk you to the edge, but I can't go over the edge with you, because I'm already over the edge. It's like I'm over there and over here, but I know you can go over the edge. And that's like, it's a very personal thing. It's like stepping off into the abyss in a way. in the best way. So it has that feeling of vast wonder. That's how it feels right at the edge there. Vast wonder, and the sense of that personal will that's trying to force the hand of life is just not there anymore. You realize like it was a waste of time. Like you can't force reality to be other than it is, because this is it, right? And so there's this kind of openness and this reverence for the process itself that's replaced it. And I feel that in that person. They feel very personal and impersonal. It's like where the personal is dissolving to the impersonal aspect. That's how it feels. And then the hallmark of awakening, like I said, there's a fundamental shift in identity, but I could say there are several aspects to how that usually looks on the other side. One is there's a certainty that is orders of magnitude beyond conceptual certainty. So even to get to that precipice, you're gonna really challenge conceptual certainty in a big way. It will be challenged. You'll realize all the things you thought you knew about yourself, you really don't know. Actually, all the things you thought about the universe or whatever, you just don't know. So you will have already surrendered a lot of that kind of intellectual certainty. But when a shift actually happens, there's this really deep, almost like a primordial certainty that's obvious in the way people will speak. No matter how experienced or inexperienced they are with like spiritual terminology, it's just obvious. They'll write me something or mention something or leave a comment or send me a message, and it's like completely obvious. It's not like I'm talking to an enlightened person suddenly. It's just so clear. And one day ago they were questioning everything still. They're just like, oh, so much doubt. I don't know what's going on. And all of a sudden it's like absolute clarity. So there's this kind of certainty that is unmistakable. The other thing that I would say is it's self-validating. And that's a hard thing to explain until it happens, because we question so much. Like, again, I was a wall of doubt until this happened. I just lived in doubt and I didn't even realize how much doubt I had. And I was smart. Like, I'm a smart guy. Like, intelligence was my thing, and it was my one thing. I could solve problems, and I was sharp. And yet I didn't realize how much doubt was just built into all of that. Doubt about myself and about everything. So when all of a sudden that cloud of doubt, it's not like it lessens, it's just gone. Like it's just lifted, like a curtain is just lifted. And you're like, oh, this is what it feels like to move without doubt. It doesn't make you like uber confident or something. It's not like an extreme thing. It's like a very, very peaceful thing. You just trust life. It's simple. Whatever you do, and you don't second guess it. You don't worry about it, whether it's a right or wrong thing. It's just what's happening. It's super simple. So there's this simplicity and innocence that comes online with it. And again, it's self-validating. The truth of the experience, that it's more real than what you took to be real before, is naturally revealed when the doubt veil is lifted. It's not added, it's already there. The certainty is already there. The self-validating nature of truth and reality, it's already there. You just had to have that veil of doubt lifted off of your experience to see it. So there's a self-validating as a sort of marker for awakening. And then often, this one varies, but often there's a significant kind of emotional outflow. I don't know how else to explain it. It feels like you can emote in a much more free way than you could before. You may have tears that you can't even tell, are they joy or sadness? You don't even know. There's like just like really enjoyable ability to emote, and the body can feel everything, and it's totally fine. There's no emotions that you're like, oh, not that emotion. None of that's happening. It's just this experience of emotion just flows out, and it often happens kind of quickly, and then it comes to a really deep settled place, like a peace that you didn't know before. Like, I think the Bible has a term in there, the peace that passeth all understanding. That's very much this. So often there's some kind of emotional outflow or an emotional energetic release that sort of precipitates into this really deep equanimous state, like true equanimity. Yeah, and you just trust. You just trust life now in a very different way. Like it settles so much. It doesn't solve problems, it just eliminates them. Makes them not there, and so those are some of the hallmarks, I guess, if that's helpful.
Yeah, the will piece is really interesting, because I keep coming, maybe it's just in my field, but I keep hearing the word surrender a lot. Your thoughts on that term and the mechanisms of surrender?
Yeah, so those are very tied together. So that sense of what I would call personal will. And again, I have to be precise when I talk about this stuff. It doesn't mean like the skeptical mind will say, oh, well, if I don't have personal will, how can I defend myself if someone attacks me? Or how can I not walk into oncoming traffic? It's like, for the same reason you don't walk into oncoming traffic already. You already know not to do that. You're not going to do it because because the sense of personal will has just dissolved into the sort of universal will. So those issues aren't really issues, but the sense of a personal will that's apart and based in duality, based in the very strong fundamental, almost fundamental sense that I'm a separate entity. When that results in this kind of pushing and pulling on life, a sort of struggles there that we don't realize how much it's there. Not only struggle outwardly, but even the other side of things, almost like a hesitation, like almost like afraid to move, and both those together are just so uncomfortable. That's what I would actually call that personal separate will that's based on an illusion. And when that's not there, it feels exactly like surrender. It just feels like surrender. So the funny thing about surrender though is I'm not sure I can tell you how to surrender, because then someone will try to turn it into a doing. It's actually not a doing. It's more like the nature of reality. And reality surrenders. It's rather simple, actually. So it kind of feels more like you get surrendered. You get surrendered to the process sooner or later when you realize you can't control it. And then the fun happens.
I love how it's not you become surrendered, it's you get surrendered as well. So even the mind's like, okay, I can't. No. There's a reason it's worded that way.
I have a friend who's a Buddhist monk, and he was given a talk at one of my retreats recently, and he said, at first you think you're in the driver's seat with this whole thing, but after a while you realize you're not in the driver's seat, you're in the trunk. You're going wherever it takes you, this quote unquote Dharma vehicle, or this awakening vehicle, or whatever the heck it is. Its power is beyond any individual will. But the good news is you are that as well. That is your identity. It's just, you have to let go of a very limited experience of identity to know that.
From your, I don't want to use the word vantage, but I'm just going to use that word because it's easy. From your particular vantage, is everyone else also waking up basically because you've woken up? Is it just a matter of time?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, this again was very difficult to talk about because language is sort of dualistic by nature, and it's important to have that sort of communication in practical ways. But yeah, you can't wake up and see a bunch of asleep people. It doesn't really work that way. It's like, that's why I know that this experience is also yours and everyone's experience. This is already in everyone's experience, obviously, very obviously. So it really feels more like awakeness is. That's it. There aren't people in it that are not awake. It's just awakeness. That's all this is. This is this kind of awakeness. And it looks like the physical world that we call the physical world, but it starts to become becomes rather formless. Formless and intimate, and infinite and timeless and sort of eternal, that experience of not in time. And that's true for quote unquote everyone, but there aren't really everyone's either. So language is very hard for this part of things. But yeah, you don't feel like, oh, I'm special, I got something other people don't have. That's impossible with awakening. If you feel that, you're not awake. You're in some dreamland about what you think you have. It's not like that. It's just obviously the far more natural experience of reality.
Do you think some people choose to stay in the stupor though?
Yeah, it's really funny, isn't it? Like, there's the who's the guy in the Matrix who says, I know this is all fake, but I want to just live.
It all just tastes like chicken. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So do I think that's actually happening? And I'll be honest, I kind of do actually. It sort of seems like that's happening, because the thing about this is there's no one that I could talk to about this that doesn't actually sense the truth of it, I think. But there are many people who aren't ready to face that truth. That's the truth. That's what I think. So it can be really uncomfortable for people. Some people will just go, oh, it sounds like mumbo jumbo, but it's probably more of a defense mechanism. I've had people say, like, I know exactly what that is, I'm just not ready yet. And that's fine. I would never push anybody on this because it's a very powerful process. So there is a timing to it for sure. But I do think at some level, everybody knows this, of course. And it is kind of funny to put it in those terms of like the Matrix, where it's like, maybe it is more comfortable to be in the dream in some ways, but for me, it was far more uncomfortable to be in the dream than to wake up, far more. But I'm just me. I don't know anyone else's experience about my own, honestly. And it was really hard for me to live in that world of thought identification. So,
Random question: family, kids, being in a different state of awareness, and still having worldly duties and dues. Any challenges on that front?
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's a good question. There can be. I mean, those are going to be some of the more challenging parts of life, no matter what. Parenting, close relationships, emotionally connected relationships. So it's a little hard for me to tease it out because it's been 26 years for me that this has been the case. To be honest, it's kind of hard to remember how it was before, really. Mostly what I remember was the suffering. It makes it, I think it probably makes it a lot easier in the long run to relate to anyone because I primarily relate to people through empathy. Like I can feel what they feel. And it's a pretty energetic thing. So, so no matter how I don't know, angry someone might be and repressing the anger or if they're unkind or even people who are violent, like I really understand it. Like I really can feel into and I get that, that's the conditioning that they have in this lifetime. And, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be justice in the world because of course there should. And, if people break laws, they should, whatever. I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm just saying like, I really understand how people get so turned around because the power of delusion is very strong. It's very strong. So for me, it just leads to a kind of compassion. And from that, what I find is through that compassion, that's how you actually reach people. And I don't even have an agenda with reaching people about awakening, but I do know if somebody's interested in awakening, they trust me a heck of a lot more when they feel that I totally understand who they are, where they are, how they came to be, and I'm not judging them because I get it, and I can feel anything they feel and I'll go anywhere they need to go. If someone trusts you because you can show them that, then there's nowhere you can't go with them. And that's in a relationship or in an awakening, mentorship situation as well.
Can't let you go today without really talking about spiritual bypassing now, can I? Can you describe spiritual bypassing, the concept, and how it can derail our spiritual progress?
Sure. Yeah. Spiritual bypassing is maybe the most basic definition I'll give. I'm not an expert on it, and there's been big scholarly works done on this and papers and so forth and published, in peer-reviewed journals and stuff. But spiritual bypassing, in the way I describe it or caution people about it, is having some direct insight. Like you have some direct insight, maybe mystical experiences, maybe even initial awakening, but then you really don't want to do that shadow work. You just don't want to face all the stuff that's down there, the shame, the guilt, the resentment, the anger, the fear. Mostly it's a lot of fear around all these other emotions. You don't want to face all that. So you just kind of tell yourself and you tell other people, oh, there's no one here. There's, none of that stuff actually exists. And that's all in the human scale, but I'm transcendent or something. And you sort of identify, you re-identify with a sort of spiritual persona instead of actually going where the realization will take you, which will take you right into the shadow. So the extreme version of this is someone who gets a little culty. Like you can have people that are kind of become cult leaders. They're out there right now. There's some really good documentaries on sort of modern or contemporary cult situations. And it's all based on sort of dysfunctional human psychology, right? The leader and the followers and all. But that's the extreme version of spiritual bypassing, is like starting to excuse even abusive behavior by using spiritual concepts. This you have to have a lot of accountability to go through this process, and do it right. Like you really have to have accountability for everything. So you're gonna become more sensitive to your own flaws, not less. And that's really important. You're going to become more sensitive to your own repressed emotions, not less. And that's more important. That's very important. You're going to become more sensitive to your distorted beliefs, and you have to be willing to face them. So, as you said earlier on, something about echo chamber, and that can happen. It happens to rock stars. It happens to people where you put enough yes people around you, or you filter only the kind of people who are just going to follow you blindly. You may not even realize how much you're spiritually bypassing, but it's something to be on guard about, I would say probably when that happens, this is like psychologically speaking, there's probably a personality disorder going on when it becomes extreme, like a sort of narcissistic personality disorder. But it does happen. So using spiritual concepts instead of letting the insight take you deeper and deeper into your own exploration of your stuff, that is bypassing.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. I was just tuning into a couple of podcasts myself, and the conversation was around the overuse of psychology terms in modern day vernacular, as we're trying to become more and more trauma informed. But then we just end up there was like some challenges to having that language used so flippantly. And then that I'm sort of extending that. I want, like, just as a contemplation to what does it mean for spiritual concepts being so widely accepted more and more, which is a beautiful thing in many ways. You know, people label it as the expansion of consciousness. And then just are we just making sure that there's the right reverence, and, we're not using things flippantly. The right reverence is in place. Sorry, this is just a contemplation. I'm not even sure if there's a question in there, but if you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, I think it relates. Yeah, I think it relates for sure. One of my favorite quotes from my own Zen teacher years ago, he said, ultimately, this process, or realization process, is about living out of the innermost promptings of your tender and loving heart. But without insight, without awakening, essentially, is what he's saying, you'll think you're living out of the innermost promptings of your heart, but you'll be living out of the outermost promptings of your deluded ego. So it's really important to understand human psychology. And all you got to do is look back in history to see people have done very, very bad things with very good intentions, and probably have themselves convinced of the good intentions. I mean, think of like Pol Pot and things like that, where it's like, at least on the surface, they seem to have good intentions, but it turned out to be massive violence, right? So that's an extreme version, but we all have the ability to introspect and see where's a small version of that in me, right? That's how we wake up from our own self-imposed delusion, is to see your own tendencies, your own selfishness, your own greed, your own, all of it, right? Being willing to just keep looking and seeing what's there. in a personal way, and really investigating and taking inventory of your own psyche and your own intentions and your own beliefs, and not putting labels on things and sort of just using that as a bypass or a Band-Aid or something. And I think that's important. But yeah, we can overuse any terminology. And one of the things I say often is I'd say this to people in deep realization, like even very, very deeply realized people. I say, never underestimate the power of delusion. It's powerful and it's out there. And what happens is things get co-opted. So any terminology I use can get co-opted out there for sure. The term awakening can turn into something it's not, or turn into something I don't mean by it, and not actually refer anymore to an actual process of transformation at the level of identity. So any spiritual term that can happen to, and any psychological term, like gaslighting, narcissism, like sociopath, like these terms become very common vernacular, and many people who use them don't even know the clinical definition at all. They don't really know what the diagnostic criteria are and so forth. Similar to spirituality, if you don't have the actual insight, but you're using terms like non-duality or awakening, then I don't think you're doing anything wrong or evil, but you may be pretty deluded. Like you don't realize what that's actually referring to, that it's a possibility for people to, and including yourself, to experience a deep and fundamental transformation. So I'm always alert that is the mechanism of mind to sort of co-opt things and turn them into its own world of which lives in a world of sort of illusion and concepts. And so what does that mean to me and how I talk about this? Well, a couple things. One is I do address that directly. I address the mechanisms of delusion. I address the mechanisms of mind identification so people can see that happening. And I do try to vary the terminology I use sometimes. I try to come at it from different angles. I try to keep it fresh so that it doesn't just turn into a kind of like a sort of meme, you know what I mean? Like something that's just, I don't know. It's a thing. It's a thing in human psychology where if you hear something enough times, you'll incorporate it into your own illusory identity. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to question the illusory identity and give it a critical hit.
Thank you for describing that. You've mentioned the word delusion a lot in lots of different contexts and in lots of different ways. This is I know this is going to be an annoying question to ask in some ways. Can you describe delusion as you sort of perceive it? Because I can feel how expansive the question is, but yeah, it just feels appropriate to ask it if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it in different ways. So on one level, like if a purely intellectual level, delusion would be operating from a belief that's distorting A, and B, that you don't even know you have, right? And that can lead to massive problems. It can lead to violence. It can lead to self-harm. It can lead to all kinds of things. So at the level of cognition, understanding, intellect, delusion is really holding false beliefs, especially when you don't even know you're holding those beliefs. You just think the world is actually that way. So the very simple example I give often is like, somebody who is really identified with their own thoughts might think that guy's an asshole, right? That guy's a jerk. But they actually believe that guy's a jerk. Like there's someone out there that's a jerk. They don't realize like, no, I have a thought that guy's a jerk. And it's based on this interaction I had with him where maybe he wasn't so nice. Oh, but that other time I wasn't so nice, right? Maybe, like if you really think about it, there's much more to it than an objective truth that there's some guy out there who's a jerk. But if we're identified enough and don't realize we hold those beliefs, then we can't question the beliefs. And then we can't deconstruct and see how did you even get there in the first place. And if you do it enough, you'll start to find that guy's not a jerk, actually. He's a human being. And you might find you have a lot more in common with him than you want to admit, right? So things like that. So that's one level of delusion. In the most fundamental way, the way I experience it when I'm working with somebody who's going through awakening, let's say, I feel it as fixation. So there's something about reality, this that is completely non-fixated. There's a beautiful line in the Heart Sutra that says, freed from delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it. And the delusive hindrance, that is the sort of feeling of mind identification to me. It's the feeling of separate identity. So if I'm talking to someone and they're waking up, like they're going through the process and we're working, I feel like I'll just feel this kind of fixation somewhere. And then we just kind of address it. Like I'll just go, have you looked here, and then it'll dissolve, right? And then all of a sudden there's some like another degree of freedom. And then later on, another fixation will arise. And then as we just keep addressing those fixations, it's just like more and more openness. until something hits like a critical mass, and then the identity shifts. So really for me, like energetically, maybe it's more of a sense of fixation, because what happens ultimately in deep realization is the sense of all fixation is just blown away. And it feels the degrees of freedom is astounding. The experience of freedom is astounding. Um, and so because of that, when it's not there, like in a human psychology, like in a human sort of mind mechanism, and you're talking to that person and you sense it, it stands out like a sore thumb. What's interesting though is this is pretty much permission based. I don't really analyze people like that, but if I'm working with somebody, it's very obvious to me. If they give me permission to, like, kind of feel into what's happening, then it just stands out, and that's what we address. So on the other end of the spectrum from like the sort of rigid definition of intellectual belief based delusion, on the other end of that spectrum is a sort of energetic fixation in the way their psyche moves.
Profound. Thank you so much for sharing that. Interesting feeling from the outside looking into your space. Do you still face challenges in your day-to-day stuff? Challenges emerge, or are you pretty equanimous through most of the stuff that goes on in your day-to-day?
I'd say it's pretty equanimous all the time for the most part. Like, I mean, I can talk about something as a challenge conventionally, but it's usually only if it's practical. So I might say, we have this challenge, should we do this or that? How should we approach it? But that's just for communication and language. I don't actually feel it as a challenge usually. It's more like whatever happens next, it's just like, oh, cool, that's happening now. Oh, interesting, right? Like, wow. It's like watching a good movie, right? In my life, why not? Why can't it just be a movie? Like, if you knew everything that was going to happen in the movie, it wouldn't be that interesting, right? Once you've seen it enough times. But if you don't actually know what's going to happen next, it's kind of like an adventure. Yeah. So that's how it feels, is like, well, something could take a turn that you might interpret as what you didn't want, but you don't know where that's going to lead. You don't know what the next turn is going to be, or the next one, or the next one. So it's all really an adventure. So it feels kind of like that to me, to be honest. It's like, I try to be empathic with other people because I know people suffer around certain things. Like when something is disrupted in their life, like I have empathy for that. But in my own experience, like the disruptions aren't problematic anymore. They just feel like, I don't know what, oh, wow, this is happening now. Okay, let's see where that goes,
Wow. Angela, I want to link people back to your channel. You mentioned some playlists there as well. There's obviously the book. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about both from your own words.
Sure.
For people to tune into.
The book's easy to find on Amazon. It's available in hardback and Kindle. It's Awake, It's Your Turn. And if you type in Awake, It's Your Turn, you'll find it for sure. And it's available in multiple countries. Right now, it's only in English and Spanish. And then my YouTube channel is called Simply Always Awake. And I always encourage people to look at the playlists, because most of the YouTube channels out there, people don't really look through playlists. But in mine, I took a lot of effort to designate the different things in playlists. So if you're interested in, like, there's an introductory series, if this is all really new to you, and I answer very simple questions that people would pose about awakening. So introductory series and basics of awakening are kind of where to start. And then there's a playlist called Awakening Approaches. If you haven't had any shift yet, but you want to know how to really take this on, those videos are about that. And then there's a whole bunch of other playlists if you want to see interviews and things like that. So those are the two big resources. Under any video I have a thing that has all my links, and I have other resources you can, check out if you want, like a free meditation app and stuff. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And a couple of questions before I let you go rapid fire. What's your definition of living a good life?
Oh, living a good life is living a completely, thoroughly, 100% authentic life without a sense of hesitation, fully trusting yourself and as your true identity, which has no limitations. Yeah. And feeling a fundamental okayness.
I love that. How do you define God?
Oh, I would never rob anybody of that exploration themselves. So I would say that's what you're really, really interested in. Find out about God. Yeah. But don't look at anyone's concept of God. That's the key with that.
What's the ultimate purpose of life in your opinion?
don't know if I could say the ultimate, but I could say the most fruitful purpose, if you're interested in it, is orienting toward awakening and waking up, in my opinion. If you're not interested, if it's like, I just want to be the best father I can, and that I've always wanted that, and my heart is there, that's awesome. I think that is for you, really is the best. I think for any person who has a true passion and they can be really congruent with that in a deep way and know that's the right path for them in this life, that's awesome. I wouldn't say, oh no, but you need to wake up. I don't do that. However, of all the possible things out there, the one I've seen that delivers the goods more than anything else, it's awakening.
Angelo. Brother, thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly here with us today. The time has absolutely flown. I was just like, surely we're just, is it really? Like, wow. Okay. So yeah, I have to thank you for today's podcast, and I want to thank you for your time and energy, but also, yeah, this is work that you're doing, championing for so many people around the planet. And like you said, you know, the work that you're facilitating is helping so many countless other people as well. And yeah, the conversation today also stands on the shoulders of, your entire life's work and everybody you've supported as well. So I just want to, just acknowledge you for yourself, like just the way you're doing the work and how you're doing it, and just, what you're espousing in all of us. And I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. And thanks for the recognition. And I thank you for this conversation. It's really nice to have this kind of conversation with somebody who's so good at it. I've been interviewed by a lot of people, and to have a conversation interview with somebody who's just, I don't know, it flowed really, really nicely. I can't believe the time actually. So really fun, really a pleasure to meet you.
Touch wood. Thank you so much for that. But then also you're building ego structures in. I mean, thank you. I didn't mean to say no, thank you. Thank you so much, brother, man. Really appreciate you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for your time.
I think that was one of the big things today, was also feeling into what you said about it's possible for everyone, you know. Again, I'm conscious that there are ego structures that want to sort of latch into that. But it's very inspirational to feel that it's, with a pure desire, it's not actually as far out of reach as, in the zeitgeist, it just seems like it's completely out of reach, you know?
That's that sort of human psychology aspect that comes into play. And that's why I really tell people it's a personal thing. Don't worry about us out here. Don't worry about that guru and this guy and Buddha. Like that stuff, but if the pointers help, that's great. But once you have the taste inwardly, that's where you got to go. You got to go there. Beyond the thoughts, beyond the words, beyond the emotions even.
Inspired soul, you have made it through to the end of another Inspired Evolution podcast, and I am not surprised. Look at you and your inspirations to evolve flowing. As always, my humble request, please do take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It empowers everything that is going on here at the Inspired Evolution. That's your subscription that is making all the difference. Thank you so much for taking the time to do so. On screen right now, you will find a few episodes for you to continue your inspirations to evolve and take that journey further. We have with us Brent Spirit, who is all about non-dual awareness and awakening Kundalini energy. We've also got Sailor Bob, who's a master who has actually helped countless of other individuals pop into the non-dual state of awareness, and they have gone on to become teachers of the non-dual state of awareness in their own right. An incredible conversation with John Aston also on screen for you to be able to take your pick, choose your adventure, but continue this conversation around non-dual awareness and awakening further. I'll see you in the next one.